are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joined with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man. So now that we're getting closer and closer to the NBA trade deadline, it's now becoming a little bit more clear on which teams are going to be buying and which teams are going to be selling at the trade deadline. And, you know, the trade deadline, it depends on the team, but a lot of sometimes it's very eventful, sometimes it's very uneventful.
Well, over the past couple of years, it's been very eventful. And same with the offseason, just because of the fact that contracts have gotten shorter, player movement has increased, and it seems like every trade deadline, every offseason now is just hectic. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, this one will definitely be a good one, I think.
Pretty much. Especially, so now we decided that it's a good time to start talking about some of the teams that need to make a trade, whether that be buying pieces for a deep playoff run or selling pieces to tank for the lottery. But we wanted to discuss some of those teams that are in need of making a trade before the NBA trade deadline, which I believe is February 10th this season. Obviously, if you haven't checked out last week's episode, definitely do so. We broke down our Western Conference All-Star picks, which they are now announced. The starters have been announced. So we will be, giving you guys our thoughts later in this episode. Also, subscribe to the show on YouTube and all the other various platforms as well, so you don't miss a great episode from us. But starting us off with our first team who we feel needs to make a trade, and you wouldn't think so based on the fact that who they actually have on their team, but the way things have kind of transpired, and I think it's karma, but the Brooklyn Nets definitely are a team that needs to make a trade before the deadline. Currently they are the fourth seed, and considering the fact that we all expected them to be the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, dominating the NBA until the playoffs, the fact that they're the fourth seed is pretty underwhelming, to say the least. Not to mention Kevin Durant is also currently injured. He will be out at least, I believe, another 4 to 5 weeks with an MCL sprain? I think an MCL sprain. So he's going to be out. Kyrie Irving, we all know the situation with Kyrie Irving. He's the notorious part-time player. I don't know if that works with part-time salary, part-time benefits.
Yeah, actually, that would be interesting to see what he's actually getting paid out of his salary.
I'm pretty sure he's getting his full salary. There's
probably.
Because of the guarantees in the NBA. But Kyrie Irving is also a part-time player, which means James Harden is the lone star leading a Brooklyn Nets team that, to be honest with you, has a lot of major holes on it. The big one is they really don't have any depth. And considering the fact that they are fourth in offensive rating, they're not that great of a defensive team. They're 19th in opponents' points per game. This team, there's definitely a lot to be desired from the fact that there really isn't anybody else except their top tier guys. And when you take those guys away, what do you really have left?
Well, again, they did sacrifice their depth. Guys like Jarrett Allen, Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, etc. They sacrificed that depth in order to get a James Harden and to make that big three. Now, again, when they made that trade, even before they made that trade, it was championship or bust. And as we've seen with a lot of teams in the past who've stacked together superstars, more often than not, it does not work out. And this team is looking like one of those teams that has just never been able to fully figure it out. Now, whether that's due to the COVID issue with Kyrie or injuries, the biggest issue, the lack of chemistry, if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan looking at this team, is concerning because of the fact that championship teams only win when they have great chemistry throughout the year. We know it starts in training camp, and then you build those habits throughout preseason, through the regular season, and then in the playoffs is when you really hit your groove. And if you're not able to play during those stretches, then that means in the playoffs you won't be at your best, and this is a problem that they suffered last year as well.
And again, the Brooklyn Nets could very well get healthy and then make a dominant playoff run. But we're talking about right now, they need to get to that point. And so far, considering how other teams in the Eastern Conference, like the Bulls, the Heat, at least the Bucks and the Sixers are still in consideration, there's a lot of competition at the top of the East, and the Nets need to make a move in order to keep themselves competitive. So some of the trade candidates of the roster that they're going to be looking to move, first and foremost, is Paul Millsap. We did talk about it or maybe we haven't talked about it quite yet, but Paul Millsap and the Brooklyn Nets have kind of mutually agreed that the Nets will find a trade partner for him. just because he fell out of the rotation, he's not being used. And again, Paul Millsap, we kind of called it. He's no longer the player he once was. But in Denver, he was a pretty effective player, and
Well, I mean, minus those last couple of seasons. Like when he got to Denver, he was pretty good. At this stage of his career, he's gonna be an end of the bench option or a veteran leader. But again, Brooklyn doesn't really need any of those things. They're better suited to find an actual roster player. For Paul Millsap's spot.
Exactly, and I think Paul Millsap also wants to contribute and play at least until he can. You know, that being said, he's definitely going to be on the top of the list for the Nets to be moving on from him. And I think some teams are going to be interested in Paul Millsap. I think he can still be a valuable contributor, especially on a veteran like a team that doesn't really need him, but would love to have him to make a championship run. The next guy is Blake Griffin. Again, I lost a lot of respect for Blake Griffin, especially considering how he didn't try with the Detroit Pistons, but also the fact that he's washed. The guy is not the same player he was with the Clippers, and it's quite apparent, man. And the fact is that at least the silver lining is the Nets aren't really paying him much of anything, but he really isn't helping the Nets at all.
Basically, like that stretch last season where he joined the Nets until the end of the season is like what they got him for. Like they got the most out of him. And it feels like after that, it's like he has nothing left in the tank anymore after that little stretch that he had towards the end of the season.
Pretty much.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so he's definitely someone they're going to be looking to move on from if they can. The next guy I would say is Bruce Brown. And although Bruce Brown has been a productive player for them, he's the type of player that doesn't even look at the basket in terms of,
Unless he's like 5 feet away.
Exactly. And the fact of the matter is the Nets need guys to spread the floor and actually be able to score when called upon. Like if someone double teams Kevin Durant and James Harden, you want to be able to be available for a kick out and be reliable to hit that shot, 8 or 9 times out of 10. And Bruce Brown just isn't that. And I think, again, defensively, he brings some valuable assets. And I think if you package Bruce Brown with a Paul Millsap or a Blake Griffin, you might get a pretty decent return. But I think he's definitely one of those players the Nets might look to move on from at the trade deadline. And finally, the last guy they might look to move is Kyrie Irving. Although the Nets have worked out a deal to get Kyrie to kind of be a part-time player, which might even be a full-time gig because COVID rules are just so fluid like that. But again, Kyrie Irving has literally been a disaster in terms of he has not been committed to the team. We've talked about this in previous episodes where you can't rely upon Kyrie Irving. And I think if the Nets have a trade offer that is worth their while, they would definitely listen at the very least.
Well, not just the fact that Kyrie doesn't play sometimes. We know he took a hiatus last season as well. But also the fact that he's an injury-prone player. And you combine those two things together and you have a superstar who's supposed to be a superstar but doesn't play like a superstar because he's not there half the time. So what does that give you?
Exactly. So those are sort of the players the Nets would be looking to move on from. Some of the players that they can potentially target at the deadline. And again, they're looking for some depth scoring, some veteran guys. So Garrett Temple was one from the New Orleans Pelicans. Could definitely be an easy guy they can get a trade for. 3-and-D guy, veteran guy. And plus he's been on Brooklyn before, so they know the player. Tristan Thompson's another one. And again, he's kind of been rotting away in Sacramento. But again, Tristan Thompson can still be effective. He's a championship caliber player. And he's a playoff veteran. He knows what it takes to win in the playoffs. That'll be another good addition for the Brooklyn Nets. Another guy is Harrison Barnes, I would say. Although it's very hard to facilitate a trade with Harrison Barnes.
Shout out Harrison Barnes' agent.
I was about to say that. But yeah, shout out Harrison Barnes' agent. But again, it'll be tough to make a trade happen. But he would be a great addition for the Nets. TJ Warren is another guy because, again, the Indiana Pacers, who we'll talk about a little later, are kind of selling off pieces. So he might be a guy that's available.
Well, I mean, the problem is he's not going to play. So nobody knows when he's going to play.
Yeah, and then finally, Jeremy Lamb is another guy who, again, if a guy like TJ Warren isn't a guy you can get, Jeremy Lamb is definitely a serviceable bench player that you can definitely acquire pretty easily. So those were some of the players that I think the Nets can kind of acquire. The gist of what they're looking for is depth. They need other guys to contribute besides the big three, and they got to make those decisions pretty soon.
Well, they also need defense as the main thing, right? You mentioned they're ranked 19th in defense. If you want to make that championship push, you have to at least have history shows you need at least a top 10 defense, which they are not. that right now. So they definitely need some depth and some defense. Moving us on into another team that needs to make some changes at the trade deadline, and this one is no surprise because they've been in the news a lot, particularly because of one player, and we're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, the Philadelphia 76ers are currently tied for the fourth seed in the East, and they've had some struggles throughout the season. Injuries, obviously protocol issues, really decimated like a 10-15 game stretch for them. But behind Joel Embiid's recent MVP play and some good role players stepping up in the absence of Ben Simmons, guys like Tyrese Maxey, Seth Curry's also been good when his shots falling. George Niang's being a good pickup for them. Same thing with Andre Drummond. They've climbed themselves back out of that hole where they're like a 10th seed in the Eastern Conference, and now they've established themselves as one of those upper tier teams in the Eastern Conference, rightfully so. The main issue is that they have an all-star player missing, and that is, of course, Ben Simmons. They need a second all-star to pair with Joel Embiid.
And an all-defensive caliber player as well.
And one of the best playmakers in the league, right? No matter how much we harp upon Ben Simmons' failures as a player, the thing is, he's an all-defense type player. He's one of the best playmakers in the league. And when you take that away, you take away a lot from the Philadelphia 76ers, which they've clearly shown that they've missed, especially the playmaking and the defense. So the Philadelphia 76ers, their main issue is that they need a second star to pair alongside Joel Embiid. And some trade candidates for their team, obviously Ben Simmons is their biggest trade candidate.
My favorite player, Ben Simmons.
Everyone's favorite player, right? And the problem is, again, Daryl Morey has been stubborn on the fact that he wants a good return for Ben Simmons. Now, we've been back and forth in terms of should he not, push that forward. But that's another topic of conversation. The point is, Ben Simmons is their biggest.
They gotta move him. Like they gotta move Ben Simmons. Like it's just plain and simple. Now, again, do you fault Daryl Morey for wanting a big return? Yes and no. Like yes, in the sense you can't really fault him because of the fact that he's trying to get the best return for his organization, but also you can fault him because you're hurting your team in the process. So Ben Simmons is definitely someone they got to move for sure.
Another guy that they low-key have to move, and he hasn't gotten as much flack as he deserves. Philly fans have been giving him a lot of crap, rightfully so. And we're talking about Tobias Harris. This guy's making like $95 million per season, and he's not doing anything.
Dude,
right?
We called this.
Again, at his best, he's a fringe all-star type of player. But when you're playing alongside a Joel Embiid and then other ball-dominant players, we saw him as best in systems like the LA Clippers, their free-flowing type of system where they didn't really have that go-to guy. And he really thrived in that type of system. Tobias Harris has not thrived in this type of system, particularly, playing the power forward spot. He's not quick enough to keep up defensively with small forwards. Playing him at the power forward spot, he's a bit of an undersized power forward. And then, like I said, on defense, he gets cooked, right? And you're not winning with Tobias Harris playing that way. And him, basically taking up like half the salary cap for the Philadelphia 76ers, you need to get rid of him somehow.
He can't be your second guy. Like, your second guy on the championship team, you can't have Tobias Harris be that guy for you. And again, you kept him over Jimmy Butler. Now, Jimmy Butler obviously wanted to leave, but you did give a lot of salary to Tobias Harris instead of Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, so Tobias Harris is definitely another candidate that they need to move on from. And then finally, we have a couple of guys, a couple of role players that they could acquire pieces for or keep. It depends what they can do with these guys. Furkan Korkmaz, Shake Milton, and Danny Green. All three guys are capable role players who could serve, championship caliber teams well, who could definitely do some things for them. And in return, the Philadelphia 76ers could net some assets back, particularly in, like, for example, a Ben Simmons trade. You throw in one of these guys and you're able to get, assets back or match salaries or whatnot. So these guys are definitely some guys that could be on the move. But, if you keep these guys, it's not bad either.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they're pretty serviceable in terms of Korkmaz has had some good games here and there. Shake Milton can be useful. But again, if you can get something better for these guys, you might as well explore
Danny
those.
Red.
Yeah, exactly.
So some trade targets for them. Obviously, they need to pair, like I said, a second All-Star with Joel Embiid, or at least a second star caliber player. Some names we can mention are DeJounte Murray. I think that would be a great pairing in terms of what you need. What you're missing from Ben Simmons is defense and playmaking. DeJounte Murray has shown he can do great in both areas, particularly defensively.
I mean, at first, like my first reaction to it when he said that, I was like, nah, I don't see the Spurs trading him. But I can see Popovich being intrigued by Ben Simmons. I can see that.
It would definitely be like I guess like a even kind of trade if you like swapped both players.
But Ben Simmons' potential is a lot higher than DeJounte Murray's.
But again,
I do like
DeJounte
DeJounte.
Murray has been an all-star caliber player this season.
Yeah.
He's been really good for the San Antonio Spurs. Now, again, if you're able to get Ben Simmons in return, like, again, Philadelphia needs to move on from Ben Simmons, and anything is better than Ben Simmons because of the fact that Ben Simmons is not on the court, right? So DeJounte Murray, getting him back would be a great benefit for the Philadelphia 76ers. Another guy is Bradley Beal. Now, Bradley Beal has had a down year. The Washington Wizards, after starting out first in the East, have dropped all the way down to 10th seed.
We called it.
And Bradley Beal has not been great this season. Wizards fans are already trying to get him to move on from the team. And I think at this point, the relationship has reached its end. Right, the Wizards did what they could. Bradley Beal's done what he could, and I think it's just time for them to part ways at this point.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've been talking about Bradley Beal moving on for a while now, and it just seems like that time. And Philly has always been linked to him just based on the fact that the salaries with him and Ben Simmons match up, and he would be a perfect fit for what the Sixers need. Like, the Sixers have Maxey, who's pretty serviceable as their number one. Put a capable tip number two in Bradley Beal. There you go. With Embiid, that's a pretty good team.
And again, Embiid needs his spacing, right? Bradley Beal provides that, at least, what he can do.
When he feels the shot.
Yeah, when his shot is falling, which it hasn't been this season, granted. But Embiid needs the spacing. A guy who can score alongside Joel Embiid would really help in the playoffs because that's what they've been lacking in the playoffs for the past couple of years. So Bradley Beal could definitely handle secondary scoring responsibilities. Then we have a guy like Harrison Barnes, which Hani mentioned. He would be a great fit for, honestly, any team. Just because of the fact that he is a prototypical 3-and-D type of player, small forward, power forward.
But once again, shout out his agent.
Shout out his agent. But again, when you're talking about the Ben Simmons deal, Harrison Barnes also makes a good amount of money. So if you're able to pair salaries, throw in another guy like a Danny Green alongside, in that trade, make some pieces work, that's definitely a serviceable option, particularly because I don't know. I feel better about Harrison Barnes on my team than I do Tobias Harris, just because, again, Harrison Barnes isn't making as much money, and he's kind of, to be honest, better. And then finally, we have Malcolm Brogdon, right? Another guy who, similar to DeJounte Murray, another younger player who can basically do it all on the court, very, very high IQ, would be a great fit on any team. And again, the Indiana Pacers, as we're going to talk about soon, are looking to basically sell everyone. So I think Malcolm Brogdon would be a great fit.
I don't know if they're going to sell Brogdon, though. That's my main concern. I think he's probably one of those guys that they might consider keeping just because he does provide them with some value. But again, if the Sixers can entice them, it's definitely a good addition for them.
Yeah, so, those are some type of players that the Philadelphia 76ers could try to target. Basically, they just mainly need a second star for Joel Embiid.
But unlike some of the other teams on our list, they have the most flexibility because they have the most intriguing player in Ben Simmons, and they have salary to match. Like, that's the big thing, and they have picks.
Now, again, it is going to depend on the stubbornness of that guy right there, and what he wants to do. But all signs are kind of indicating that he's just going to wait until the offseason. The problem is Joel Embiid is a once-in-generational type of talent, and you don't wait to try to surround him with talent, try to make that championship push. So it'll be interesting to see what Daryl Morey does for sure.
Yeah.
As I hinted before, we're going to talk about the Indiana Pacers and their fire sale that they're trying to, start. They're currently the 13th seed in the Eastern Conference. They basically had the same type of roster, the same number of players for the past, couple of years. And it's always just been a very average team, some good players at the top, and then the rest of the team is not that great. It's just mainly being the same mediocrity. And so the worst place in the NBA is always that middle of the pack, and Indiana basically has personified that as a team. And everyone knows, and the Indiana Pacers know at this point they just need to blow it up and start over. So that's why basically they're trying to trade everyone on their team. Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis, Karis LeVert. As we talked about, Malcolm Brogdon could be an interesting case whether or not Indiana decides to trade him. But his name has been mentioned in the rumors as well. Jeremy Lamb, TJ Warren. Basically, like I said, it's a fire sale. So the Indiana Pacers are trying to just trade everyone and tank at this point.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, based on where they've been for the last few seasons, it's just coming to that where they have to do something. And I think, blowing it up and really establishing a hard reset might just be the way to go for the Pacers. And they have some very good players that they can move, and they can potentially pull in Oklahoma City, trade everybody, and get some good assets for them back.
And on the opposite end of the equation, the Indiana Pacers are the main target this trade deadline because of the fact that their players can really help a lot of teams out.
Yep.
Especially championship aspiration-based teams. Adding a Miles Turner to any of those championship caliber teams would be a huge boost.
Adding some bonus to any of those teams would be a huge boost.
Exactly. A Karis LeVert, a guy who can get you 20, 30 on any given night. Another a Jeremy Lamb who can get you like 15 points off the bench. So the Indiana Pacers are a very interesting team in the sense that they could really shake up the dynamic of the NBA this trade deadline. So some of the trade targets that they could try to acquire in return for, fire selling this team. Obviously, number one is draft picks. That's going to be their main source of attraction, right? They're going to try to trade all these guys, try to get younger, try to, like you said, pull OKC and try to tank.
Scout those 12-year-olds.
Okay, that sounds weird, but yes, I get what you mean. That came out weird, but yes.
Listen, man, it's what OKC's been doing, man.
That is technically what is happening. But yeah, so draft picks, like we said, draft picks are going to be the main source of attraction for the Indiana Pacers. Another player, Ben Simmons, obviously, like we just mentioned, if Indiana could try to acquire Ben Simmons in return for facilitating a Miles Turner Domantas Sabonis trade. Again, Ben Simmons is still a very young player. He does have his faults, but hopefully he could improve in a new situation. Indiana is not, one of the bigger cities.
Doesn't have good nightlife for Ben Simmons.
Exactly. So maybe then he'll be forced to focus on basketball.
But Indiana has a good culture too. And Rick Carlisle, again, he's not the best with young players, especially this young generation players.
But he will whip them up into shape.
Exactly. And he can get the most out of players too. So, Ben Simmons can definitely be an interesting option for the Pacers.
Another young player who is making a good amount of money, but you could definitely throw into your rebuilding plan, is John Collins. Now, John Collins, like we mentioned previously, he's been disgruntled in Atlanta. And, if Atlanta wants to ship him out, the Indiana Pacers, I think, are a great team to try to acquire him. Another young player they can build around. He can do it all on the offensive end. He's gone much better on the defensive end. And for Atlanta, they need defense. Their offense isn't the biggest problem. Their defense is the biggest problem. And, being able to acquire, a Miles Turner or somebody for John Collins will definitely
even LeVert would help them.
Yeah, it would be a win-win for both teams, I think. So John Collins is definitely another interesting name. Another name, we're going to talk about the Lakers a little bit later on, but THT, Talen Horton-Tucker, he's basically the only young player on this Lakers team. I guess Malik Monk and Kendrick Nunn, but THT is definitely the youngest by far. And so, with the Lakers trying to get better, perhaps they try to acquire like a Miles Turner. Again, the salaries will be an issue for the Lakers, but as we've seen with the big market teams, they can maneuver around anything, to be honest.
Salary cap doesn't exist for them. For big market teams, especially in the NFL. I mean, look at the LA Rams, man.
Bro, the Rams just get every single good player, I feel like. And then finally, we have other young prospects or young projects. Guys like I mentioned, THT, Marvin Bagley and Malachi Flynn are two other young players you could definitely throw into a rebuilding plan, who are a little bit of projects, but their potential, they have very high upside. So you can afford to wait on them to develop further and give them that opportunity.
Listen, I'm not just saying this because I'm a Raps fan, but Malachi Flynn in the Pacers might actually be a good idea. Just because he's going to get minutes and he's going to be developed. And he's going to get opportunity, which he's not getting in Toronto. So, speaking of Toronto, they actually are our next team that we want to talk about who needs to make a trade. Now, the Raptors are currently the 9th seed in the Eastern Conference, and they've had a pretty good run in terms of where they started the season was not great. And, they're slowly getting back to where we expected them to be. Now, obviously, I think offensively, they definitely are surprising us because they have the 11th ranked offense in the league. But defensively, they have the 20th ranked defense. But that's not even where the Raptors struggle. Their main struggle is depth. Their starting five does a pretty good job when they're healthy. But after that, getting production out of literally anybody else beyond maybe the seventh man, like beyond maybe Chris Boucher and Precious Achua.
And again, Chris Boucher was terrible to start the season.
Yeah, he's turned it on as of late. But again, getting any
Ken Birch as well.
Yeah, Ken Birch too. But getting any production out of anyone past those guys is basically next to impossible, or it's basically at random at this point. Like, we don't know who's going to be able to step up, and which is pretty disappointing considering on paper the Raptors look to have guys who could step up, like a Svi Mihailuk, like a Yuta Watanabe. It just hasn't worked out that way. So now the one thing for the Raptors, they do have the Goran Dragic expiring deal that they can attach to any of the trades that they're trying to make. The problem is Goran Dragic hasn't barely played this season, and he hasn't looked the best when he's on the court, when he was on the court as well. And he's making $19 million this season.
Now, again, I think any contenders will try to pick up Goran Dragic. I don't think it's a case of an if. But more so, what will the Raptors be able to get back for Goran Dragic?
Exactly.
Is the question.
Exactly, and that's more of the concern for Masai Ujiri. But again, they can still attach a young player, a young piece with them, and Masai usually has a good evaluation of talent as well. So some of the trade candidates that the Raptors will definitely need to look at shipping out. The first and foremost is Chris Boucher. Now, as good as Chris has been playing for the last little stretch of games, he's been playing really well. The reality is he's on an expiring deal, and does he fit the Raptors' long-term plans? He's 29 years old. He's pretty much peaked in terms of what he can be as a player, and the Raptors might want to cash in and maybe flip him for a player that might suit them a little bit better long-term, or even just for the season, to be honest.
Now,
with
again,
you.
Chris Boucher is a good player, but he has some massive flaws, right? His weight, he gets bodied.
His three-point
really
shot
easily.
is gone.
Exactly, and I think him joining another team, and taking on more of a limited role would be really good for him, because the role that he's taking on for the Raptors is he's getting too many minutes. He's been good in those minutes, but he's getting too many, and his flaws really show when you give him all those minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So Chris Boucher is definitely one of those guys the Raptors are going to look to move. The next guy, I already mentioned him, is Goran Dragic, just because he's not playing. He's not part of this team's long-term plans, and they have to get something for Goran Dragic at this point. They can't just let him walk in free agency and basically just, this is the return for Kyle Lowry we're talking about here. And so Masai has to get something for Goran Dragic. The next guy is Malachi Flynn, who we talked about a little earlier. Now, Malachi Flynn, I still like him as a player, and I still see the potential he can bring. The problem is he has a couple of flaws. Number one, inconsistency. He's not consistent at all. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that his role hasn't been very consistent. There are moments where he plays garbage time. There are moments where he's thrusted in at the beginning of the first quarter. This guy, we don't know when he's going to play. The second is he's undersized. And again, some guards like Fred VanVleet can overcome being undersized, but Malachi also doesn't have the physical strength or the finishing ability that a Fred VanVleet has, or the creativeness, to be honest with you, to do some of the things that Fred can do to overcome that. And also the three-point shot. Malachi does have a good stroke. He has a good shot. It's just the fact that it's not going in as consistently as you'd want it to go in. And that's a big struggle.
Okay, let me put it this way. Malachi Flynn has sucked this season. He's been bad.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not what Raptors fans were hoping for, especially off of, that stretch of games that he had during his rookie season where he looked like a real potential good player. Malachi Flynn has just been bad.
I like him defensively. Defensively, I don't really have a lot of complaints.
But again, he still has those issues of getting lost defensively no matter how good he is one-on-one. And that's an issue. Particularly when, it's not a good sign when you get benched in a G League. And that's exactly what's happened to Malachi Flynn. If you're getting benched in a G League, you need to really work on your game. And for the Raptors now, with the emergence of Delano Banton this year, Delano Banton's been benched as well. But you really saw how much potential he had as a 6'9" point guard.
And Nurse does trust him a lot more than he does Malachi. Delano gets a lot longer of a leash than
again, because Delano tries to at least make things happen. He's not afraid of the moment, whereas Malachi Flynn kind of seems afraid of making a mistake.
Yeah, and again, I still see the potential in Malachi, but he might be someone the Raptors will move on from. The next guy is Svi Mihailuk. I had big expectations for Svi Mihailuk, and he basically let me down. The guy hasn't hit more than 2 threes a game this whole season, and this guy was supposed to be a shooter. The fact of the matter is
He's
that
shooting 32.5% or 31.5% from three.
that can't happen, man. And the fact of the matter, you miss open looks too. That pisses me off the most, man. You can't miss open shots if you're supposed to be a 3-point shooter.
Now again, he does have a player option.
Yeah, he does have a player option. If he's smart, he's gonna take it because I don't see any team signing him for more than what he has right now. And then the last guy is Yuta Watanabe. Now the Raptors do like Yuta Watanabe, and I think Yuta is a player that I do respect in the sense that he always plays hard. But man, the guy has to be more consistent, man. Like when he's aggressive, when he's actually hitting his shot, he's a good player. But again, the inconsistencies is something that the Raptors just simply cannot afford to have. And Utah, unfortunately, has had to struggle with that.
And again, basically when he's making a shot, he's a very good player because he can play defense, he can handle the ball. He's got great IQ, but it's just the shot needs to fall. It needs to be consistent.
Bro,
it's aggressiveness.
He's giving Markham something to cheer for ever since Jeremy Lin. Like, bro.
Facts.
Bro, he fits well for Toronto. But again, he has to perform on the court for the Raptors to not consider trading him. So those are some of the trade candidates the Raptors obviously will be looking to move out. Some of the trade targets that they will be looking for. And again, they're looking for a couple of things. A, it's potentially a center. They need a full-size center because they clearly cannot do this undersized thing for long. Or B, they need bench scoring. Bench scoring and playmaking they need. So the first trade target, I would say, should be Miles Turner. Now, Miles Turner, we've talked about this in the past. The Raptors could make a run to get Miles Turner, but it really depends on how willing the Pacers are to work with them. But again, Miles Turner would be great for the Raptors. I think he'll be a good fit for their starting five. And he's a player that the Raptors could keep around for a good while because he's on a team-friendly deal.
He's still a young player.
Young player, serviceable, knows his role, and I think he fits the style of big man that Nick Nurse has been looking for.
And again, Nick Nurse will be creative, right? Miles Turner has wanted to, showcase more of his skills. Nick Nurse, we know whatever skills you have, he'll try to make you play, showcase those skills.
And potentially Nick Nurse can also play him with the Kem Birch too at the power forward spot, maximizing defense and still maintaining floor spacing because Miles Turner can shoot the three. So I definitely like the idea of Miles Turner going to Toronto. Now, how likely it is to happen, that's to be seen. But he's definitely a target for them. Another Indiana guy would be Karis LeVert. Karis LeVert, simply just because of the bench, his ability to score and be a good bench scorer off the bench. I like Karis LeVert a lot. I think he has a lot of creativity. He can score at all three levels. And I think in terms of the Raptors needing another creator off the bench, he's definitely a guy who can do that. He can definitely be a guy that you can send off the bench, let him get buckets.
Yeah, he can also serve as a playmaker off of the bench
Exactly.
too. He's shown he has playmaking chops. So, playing him off the bench would be, I think, a great idea.
Yeah, for sure. Next guy is Jakob Poeltl. Obviously, the Spurs, I think they just got Juancho Hernan-Gomez from their trade with the Celtics, and they might be looking to move off Jakob Poeltl. Now, Jakob Poeltl has, since getting traded away from the Raptors, has actually become a pretty decent player. He was
a decent player for the Raptors. He was just young.
Yeah, like he has solid fundamentals. He's good defensively. He doesn't really make a ton of mistakes. And again, the Raptors know the player. They drafted him. They know who he is. He has a good connection with Pascal Siakam. Siakam skills. So, and plus he's pretty affordable. I think the Raptors can definitely try to get him from the Spurs. And it could solve a lot of issues that the Raptors have been having.
Again, defensive center. That's basically what the Raptors need.
Exactly.
And so, Jakob Poeltl, he's gotten better on the offensive end as well. Now, again, he's not going to be an offensive threat, the level of like a guy like Kem Birch is. But he can definitely do well for you if you're the Raptors.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, speaking of former Raptors, the Raptors might look into reacquiring Terrence Ross from the Orlando Magic. Just because, again, they need a guy who can score and create off the bench. And if there's one thing we know about Terrence Ross, the guy is going to shoot the ball, and he's going to try to score about 9 times out of 10. And I think we know Terrence Ross. Nick Nurse is familiar with Terrence Ross, and we can probably maximize what he can do. And also, he's gotten to be a better player during his time in Orlando than he was with the Raptors.
His efficiency's gone up, and he just understands more of what to do, right? In Toronto, he was still a very young player, very inconsistent.
Scored 50 points, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, obviously, again, the Raptors definitely have some decisions to be made, but they're definitely going to be one of those teams that should be looking to make a move at the deadline. And finally, the last team we want to talk about is the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, the Lakers have had a pretty
No surprise.
underwhelming, to say the least, season. Currently 9th seed in the Western Conference. They just suck. Like, I'm sorry, man. Like, they're 25th in offensive rating, 14th in defensive rating. LeBron James, in year 19, still has to carry this team. We've joked all offseason there's a retirement home, and that's basically what the problem is. The roster is too old, very unhealthy, unreliable, a lot of imbalance. It's a mess for the Los Angeles Lakers right now. And we might have to eat our words. We were praising Rob Pelinka, but I think we really got to hold him accountable for some of these moves.
We praised Rob Pelinka because of the secondary moves that he made,
Yeah.
right? After the initial moves.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, he's built a good core around Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis and LeBron for what his options were. But clearly it still hasn't worked out.
Yeah, and again, the Lakers have a lot of questions to be answered. I don't think a lot of them will be answered at the trade deadline, but some of the players that they're going to be looking to move, obviously, the first and foremost is Russell Westbrook. Again, he just doesn't fit in terms of what a LeBron team needs to have. He doesn't space the floor. He's very turnover prone. He's not a great finisher.
Not a good shooter.
Not a good shooter. Again, I like Westbrook's in terms of he'll never cheat you in terms of he'll always play 100%. But again, his 100% isn't good enough to compete for a championship.
And a lot of the time that 100% should be cut down. Right?
Yeah.
And then when we're talking about Russell Westbrook, the main issue isn't even just his offense. The main issue is his defense, right? He sucks on the defensive end. And this is a problem with the Lakers. They basically have either offensive players or just mediocre defensive players, right? When we're talking about a guy like Carmelo Anthony, who you depend on to score like 15 to 18 points a game. That's not a recipe for success. He should not be asked to do that at this stage of his career, particularly when he sucks on the defensive end.
I mean, Melo can do it. Melo can score.
He can, but again, that's not the most efficient way of winning.
Yeah.
And especially when he's giving up more points on the defensive end, it's not great.
Yeah, no. Another guy, like obviously Taylor Horton-Tucker, the guy we talked about, the Lakers are going to look to move him. Probably should have moved him last season at the trade deadline, but they didn't. They could have gotten Kyle Lowry, but they took an L. Wayne Ellington, pretty much the whole team, besides LeBron, maybe AD?
I mean, you can't trade AD. Like, it's not really possible.
I'd consider it, but again, basically everyone besides LeBron is going to be in the conversation at the very least because of the fact that the Lakers suck. They're not as good as what they're supposed to be. They're not good enough to win a championship by any stretch of the means. You know what I heard today, actually, was that if LeBron were to come back to Cleveland the way they're playing now, they'd guarantee a championship.
I mean, Cleveland would be a good fit for him. But the problem with the rest of the players besides LeBron and AD and Westbrook is that their contracts are just not feasible enough to trade.
Exactly.
Right? Their contracts aren't worth anything. Trevor Ariza, Malik Monk, Kendrick Nunn, all these guys are basically on minimums. And you're not going to get anything for those players.
And Russell Westbrook's contract is basically unmovable. It's a tough situation.
There is one situation where Russell Westbrook's contract could be moved, and you're going to talk about that. But it's definitely an interesting prospect.
Exactly. And some of the trade targets that you just mentioned, the Lakers will be looking for in terms of what they can potentially do. The first guy is John Wall. Now, I personally think John Wall still has some game left in the tank. You know, he is not the same player he was for the Washington Wizards. We all know that. But I think he can be serviceable, and I think he's a better fit next to LeBron than Westbrook is. And they both make $40 million, and they happened to be traded for each other when Westbrook was traded from the Rockets to the Wizards. So we know the trade works.
Yeah.
So
again, it's going to be a straight-up swap, right? You bring back Russell Westbrook on a young team. Again, I don't think he would accept the fact that he's not allowed to play. I think he's going to play. But at this point, it's a young team, right? Like, you're not going to win any games anyways. You can still develop alongside a Russell Westbrook. And KPJ has shown that he kind of needs to turn down the touches a little bit, right? I think that's better for him as a player as well.
Turn down the anger, too. That would be nice.
Yeah, that is true. But, John Wall alongside LeBron, at least John Wall's percentages are better from three. He can shoot better. And I don't think, he's shown defensively he's much better than Russell Westbrook, even though at this
and he's
stage of
not
his
as
career,
turnover prone as Russell Westbrook.
So I think it would definitely be a much better fit alongside LeBron.
Yeah, for sure. Another guy that the Lakers could potentially target is the Terrence Ross, as I mentioned. Again, the Orlando Magic are definitely in a rebuilding mode. They could look to flip him. Ross can be a pretty good 3-point player.
The defense is a bit
Yeah,
hit or miss
that
at
depends.
times.
That depends. But again, Terrence Ross can definitely help the Lakers out with their spacing issues, for sure. Another guy is Karis LeVert, although very unlikely to get how they're going to get him. But he's a guy, if they do get him, would definitely improve their team. And then another guy, I just kind of threw him in there because, I mean, he might be better than what you have now. And he's you can acquire him pretty easily. It's Paul Millsap. The Brooklyn Nets have made it clear they're going to move him. So maybe the Lakers are like, hey, we can try you out
Another guy to add to the retirement home. I don't think so. But again, besides the John Wall trade, basically any other trade involving Westbrook would have to, have a third team.
Yeah.
So again, we're not really looking at the third teams right now, but you can definitely make it happen if you're Rob Pelinka. The problem is it's just not likely. And if this is a team that you're going to have going into the playoffs, again, if they even make it to the playoffs, it's going to be looked at as a massive failure. Now, again, never count out LeBron, but at the same time, this team is terrible.
I mean,
it's terrible.
LeBron's averaging 29 a game. What more do you want the guy to do? And I don't think it's fair to ask him to do any more than what he's already doing, which is pretty insane. That if he can do more, there is a potential he can do more.
I saw a graphic that I think he's gone 25 plus in the last 14 games straight.
Yeah, he has to.
Which is insane.
Only for the Lakers to win games.
Most 30-point games in the league. And again, like you said, they're not winning.
Year 19.
They're literally getting a win and then a loss, right? They're not able to get
500 ball.
Yeah, they're playing 500 ball.
Yeah, and so it's a struggle for the Los Angeles Lakers. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what they do at the trade deadline and what all these teams will be doing at the trade deadline, which is February 10th. First, bringing us into the Up and Under segment for this week. And as promised, first and foremost, the All-Star starters have been released. Obviously, the starting lineups for the Western Conference: Steph Curry, Ja Morant, LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, and Andrew Wiggins are the starting five for the Western Conference. The Eastern Conference, we have DeMar DeRozan, Trae Young, Kevin Durant, who is the captain. LeBron is the captain for the West. Giannis Antetokounmpo and Joel Embiid are the starting fives. Are you up or under on the All-Star starters?
I mean, I'm up on the most part, but I'm under on, again, number one, I'm not surprised Trae Young made it into the starting lineup. I wouldn't have him in the starting line, but I understand it, okay? Like, he's being a good player. He's averaging 27 a game. Like, I get it.
I don't.
I mean, he's a good player.
Listen, he's a good player. We never denied that he was going to be an all-star. Why should you be a starter when your team is garbage? Like, I'm sorry. I can't shake that fact. And I get it. It's what the fans want to see. But half the fan base are casuals that really are only looking for flash and awe. Like, ooh, this guy's averaging 28 a game.
And that brings us to the real surprise. Again, Trae Young wasn't really a surprise. We kind of had a feeling.
It was an annoyance for me.
It was an annoyance, but it wasn't a surprise. The real surprise was Andrew Wiggins making it into the starting lineup.
Shout out Maple Jordan.
But like, yo, that was crazy. I saw that. I couldn't believe it. Again, this brings us to the larger issue of the fact that the fan vote sucks. The fan vote should be cut down once again. Now,
significantly.
It was worth 75% before the Zaza Pachulia All-Star game almost happened, and the NBA cut it down to 50. The NBA's definitely got to cut it down again because
25. That's what it should be.
It's not as if Andrew Wiggins doesn't deserve to make the All-Star game. We didn't have him on our All-Star team, but like, sure, you can say he deserves it. One thing this means if Andrew Wiggins makes the All-Star game is I don't think Paul George is gonna make it just because of the fact that, like, I don't know how you justify leaving out the other guys for Paul George, who hasn't played that many games. But yeah, like, this brings us to a bigger point of, the fan vote needs to be cut down. Andrew Wiggins got a lot of votes because of, obviously, number one, the Golden State fans. And then number two, the K-pop dude who's their ambassador. He retweeted for Andrew Wiggins being All-Star, and basically, like, everyone retweeted for him. And then, obviously, Canadian fans. So I'm not mad at Andrew Wiggins being in the All-Star game. I find it amusing, but at the same time, as a dude who, actually respects the NBA and the process, I don't like it.
Listen, there's two things. I'm happy for Andrew Wiggins. He's only the third Canadian in NBA history to be named an All-Star, which is...
Who's the second?
We have the Steve Nash, and there's one more. I forgot the name. But He's the third one in
I was
NBA
thinking of
history.
Rick Fox, but screw Rick Fox, bro. The guy doesn't even claim Canada.
I think it might even be Rick Fox, to be
I
honest
don't
with
think
you.
he made an All-Star game. But screw Rick Fox, bro. The guy never claimed.
He's
us,
the
so screw
third
that guy.
Canadian to make an All-Star game all time, which is insane.
R.J. Barrett next year.
Jamal Murray as well.
Yeah. And Shea.
We got guys on the come up. Don't worry. But the reality is, the Wiggins had all this talent. It just shows how bad not only the Minnesota Timberwolves were, but he was in Minnesota. The fact that he wasted this talent for 8 years is pretty sad.
Again, it's all about situations for young players, right? We've seen how much they can thrive in other situations.
Like, I'm happy for him. Don't get me wrong. I'm very happy for Andrew Wiggins, but I just think I have a bad taste in my mouth that, like, listen, you made me wait 8 years to see you be an All-Star when you probably could have been one within your first few seasons. Like, look at John Moran. He's only 3 years into the league and he's already an All-Star.
But again, that is the issue when you have like a new coach every year, a front office that doesn't know what they're doing,
But
and
also
then an
him.
owner who sucks.
But also him.
Also Andrew Wiggins too.
Also
right?
him.
But yeah, I think the main point of this piece of news is definitely that the fan vote needs to be reduced for sure.
Fan vote sucks.
Next up, are you up or under on the 2022 All-Star Weekend jerseys? Right up there.
Yo, I'm under, but what the hell are these, man? Like, what are
They look
these?
like you remember in gym class they used to give you those pennies.
Those pennies? Oh my god. Bro, these are bad. Bro, the celebrity game jerseys look better than the regular All-Star jerseys. Like, who are we kidding here? Like, what are we talking about? Like, these look garbage, man. Whoever designed these should probably be fired. And immediately at
They
that.
suck.
Yeah, absolutely. But these jerseys are pretty trash. Moving on, are you up or under? On Draymond Green signs an exclusive deal with Turner Sports.
I'm up on it, man. Like, he was great when he was in the studio with TNT.
Bro, he's the first active player to sign with Turner Sports.
I mean, he deserves it, bro. He's good at his job.
He's must-see TV.
He's must-see TV, and he'll be a great replacement, I think, for Charles Barkley in the future for sure. Next up, are you up or under on the Lakers signing Stanley Johnson to a 2-year deal? Shout out the Raptors legend Stanley Johnson.
Yo, I'm up on it, man. Like, honestly, Stanley has really worked his way back from what he was. He was a failed lottery pick, told by Masai that he can't play if he sucks at basketball, and he worked on his game. Credit to him. He really learned the Raptors system and really took a more, an aggressive approach to, improving his game. And now you can see he's one of the Lakers' best players because of the fact that, he's just working harder than everyone else.
And again, the Lakers need defense, right? We talked about it. And Stanley Johnson's basically one of the only guys on the team that actually plays defense.
Listen, and he took a 10-day contract and he got a 2-year deal out of it.
3 10-day contracts.
3 10 days, and he got a 2-year deal out of it. So shout out to Stanley Johnson, man. Very happy for him. And finally, are you up or under on Suns signing their general manager, James Jones, to a multi-year extension?
I'm up on it, bro. I've talked about this on numerous occasions. What the job that James Jones has done is absolutely legendary, right? We talk about
executive of the year,
executive of the year, not just because of the fact that he built such a great team in Phoenix and such a good culture, but because of the fact that he had to work within the system that Robert Sarver had placed. And we know what Robert Sarver as an organizational head represents. It has not been great. And the fact that James Jones was able to turn around the team, turn around the culture like he did, bringing in a guy like Monty Williams, who's no doubt helped in that. Shout out James Jones, bro. Like, he really deserves whatever he gets, in terms of financial, this extension. Like, he deserves it, man.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's done a great job. Now, I joke around that, he knows how to make a good bench because he sat on the right bench 3 times.
Exactly. He sat alongside Le GM.
So. Bro, and he's trying to go for the fourth ring, sitting on the right bench.
Yep.
So shout out James Jones, man. He's done a fantastic job with the Phoenix Suns. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, YouTube. Basically, wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us with the Up and Under Podcast. Also, check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts about every single episode, so if you don't have time to listen or watch the full thing, you can read about it on our website. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at up_and_under_podcast, facebook.com/up_and_under_podcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or reaction to news as they occur. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, All-Star starters have been announced. In the next couple of weeks, or in the next week or so, we'll have the All-Star reserves being announced. So that's pretty exciting. And then trade deadline, and then All-Stars. So definitely a pretty entertaining next few weeks in the NBA. But with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.